Hi everyone, Sajid Amit here and welcome to my first impressions video of the ZMF Atrium Closed, a headphone by Zach and Bevan of ZMF. So I'm a big fan of ZMF, and those of you who know that I've stopped collecting, hoarding, listening to and reviewing headphones will still see that I do come out of my headphone hibernation to review ZMF headphones and Hyphaman headphones, two brands that I really like. The Hyphaman Susvara was for myself like one of my favorites for the longest time. The ZMF Caldera is also one of my favorites for the longest time, and it's still one of my favorite headphones. So I have come out of my quasi headphone retirement to review these headphones, listen to these headphones, and all that, right? So I'm a huge fan of ZMF, guys. So why I disclaim with that is that I'm still struggling to sort of find the words to share how I think this is phenomenal, because so many of you love the Verite Closed. The Verite Closed has had tremendous staying power. It's sort of like the king of closebacks, right? Because even the Stellio over there, I feel like is not as popular anymore, and this, goes for a drastic reduction in price in the secondary market. And Focal has not since then updated the Stellio as far as a flagship TOTL closeback goes. But this is coming in when the Verite Closed is still occupying the hearts and minds of people. But this is phenomenal. This is as good as the Verite Closed while being very different and perhaps even better for my tastes. So in this very short impressions video, I will just quickly talk about a couple of things. I'll just quickly share my notes that I have, on this Atrium Closed. I'll talk about some quick impressions on how this is different from the Verite Closed. And if you allow, I will sort of end this short impressions video by testing the same track on different gears that I have. The Hugo 2, all transportable stuff. The Diablo, which is very powerful and outputs 4 watts. And finally, the Sony WM1 ZM2, which is supposed to underpower the Atrium Closed, but it still does a fine job of making the Atrium Closed sound phenomenal, as per its own sonic signature, which is very warm and thick and analog. And the reason I want to sort of take you guys through my impression on these 3 different kinds of sources is that these headphones, guys, they do take on a lot of the elements of the sonic profile of the sources you drive them with. So some reviewers are saying they found it bright, which I don't understand. It must be their source, I think, or break in or burn in, because when I first got this, it was never bright for me. I'm someone who loves treble, loves mid-range, loves bass, and I can't have just one part of the frequency spectrum doing, most of the work. I never found this bright, even when it wasn't burnt in. And BioCellulo's drivers do require a fair amount of burn in to sound its best. And I'm not going to claim this is fully burnt in, but it still sounds amazing, guys. So yeah, I don't know why some people have perceived this to be bright. It does have a fair amount of treble energy. So very quickly, to talk about the sonic profile, the tuning, I hear this as having a greater elevation in sub bass than the Atrium Open, which is fantastic because I love sub bass. I like rock and metal, and I do think Zach wanted this to be the sub bassy headphone in a sort of set of headphones, and it does the job splendidly. And it's not just sub bass depth. It's the texture, it's the impact, it's the sort of decay that makes sub bass come alive. If you see my previous videos, especially the one in which I've compared bassy IMs, you'll know that I can be a bit of a bass connoisseur. So that's a disclaimer if that makes a difference to how you perceive my video. But I'm a bass connoisseur. I've owned the Abyss 1266 AB, 1266 Phi DC. It's such a long name for the longest time. This can give the fight to the TC in terms of its bass quality and quantity. It's awesome. It doesn't drown out anything. The bass sort of peak is around 50 hertz, so it's very controlled. It's not as mid-bassy as the Verite Closed. So it's not as thick, but it's a ZMF, so it's not ever going to be thin. And I like thin sounding headphones. I'm not going to use the word thin as a knock on headphones. I love the Hyphaman headphones. I love the Aria, and they're thin sounding. This has a lot of note weight, so if someone is saying this is thin sounding, I don't know what this person is on. It's not a thin sounding headphone. It's fairly thick, but it's not as thick as this Verite Closed, which I think is nice as far as my current preferences go. Upper mids. Upper mids are important. I do like the vocals to pop out of the track, and it does do a phenomenal job of making vocals sound powerful without ever sounding shouty. And Zach is a lot like me, because I've seen his videos and I've talked to him in the sense that he doesn't think the Harman upper mids is like the way to go. I find Harman upper mids shouty on most headphones, if not all. So this is much more mellow than Harman, but it does have upper mids presence, which is lovely. And it's a lot like the Atrium Open in that sense, but I feel like this is slightly more pulled back, the upper mids, than the Atrium Open. So more sub bass than the Atrium Open, slightly less upper mids than the Atrium Open, but definitely more than other ZMFs. And the entire treble is just extremely well done, guys. Like, you have oodles of sparkle, a sort of bite in electric guitars and air, and it hasn't gotten bright for me or fatiguing at any point. It is a dynamic headphone. So now I want to quickly talk about my quick impressions that I've noted down of playing different tracks with this. So the first track I want to talk about is Love God by Sarah Kingsley. And what is noticeable in that, in addition to the beautiful timbre of the female vocals, is that it's a very out-of-the-head staging experience. So I've noted here, it images like an open back, and it does. So there's a chorus in that track, Love God, and there's a very strong center image that comes throughout the entire track. And there are vocals happening from the right and the left, and the right side of the vocals, or the right hand vocals coming in, and the vocals coming from the left are very out of the head. So they actually sort of like pop from this sort of, orbit that I feel like is very out of the head, which is phenomenal for a closed back. I also played the Greenback Boogie song by Fandom. It's part of the Suits soundtrack. It's a theme song. Suits is a TV show that I've loved. And a lot of you might have seen Suits. It has this iconic character called Harvey Specter. He's like this guy in suits, handling lawsuits. He's like a peacock, very flamboyant, good looking. He's got this protege in Mike Ross, who's another lawyer. Wonderful TV show that I love. And so there's a song that every episode opens with. It's called Greenback Boogie, and it's by the band Fandom. And there are these claps. These claps sound so lifelike, and you can tell that the stage ambiance and reverb is just extraordinary on this headphone, right? Very, very lifelike in terms of like feeling that, the presence of the audience. So you need to have very well done air frequencies to pull off like claps really well, and because you do, like this is especially during when a crowd is clapping, it's difficult to pull that off timbrally, and also in terms of imaging accuracy and positioning. This does the job phenomenally well. I played this track Black by Pearl Jam, a classic, the live version. It was recorded at the GTE Amphitheater, and the first thought I thought was the drum beats were effing awesome. The bass is succulent, juicy, powerful, and honestly, it is the best closeback I've heard for bass, bar none. It does rival a lot of open backs for bass. I feel like this can rival the L34 or the Abyss for bass, so just keep that in mind. It's difficult to keep sort of, going on and on about bass when you have a headphone that does staging and imaging so well, as mid-range, right? So that's one of the issues I'm struggling with. But going back to that track by Pearl Jam, Eddie Vedder's voice sounds very raw and powerful and sweet when the track calls for it. Mike McCready's guitar is just phenomenal, and the separation between his voice and Mike McCready's lead guitar, especially during the lead guitar solo, is just phenomenal. It reminds me a lot of my $5,200 IM, the Aroma Audio Jewel. So the Jewel cannot do a holistic soundstage like the way this can. The Jewel cannot do bass impact like this can. Like, this is like the Jewel bass times 10 in terms of realism, not just in terms of impact. So don't get scared by its impact, because it's not going to do any bleeding or muddying of the other end of the sonic profile, right? But in terms of the separation between Mike McCready's guitar, the lead solo, and Eddie Vedder's voice, it's so well separated. I feel like you almost feel like you're listening to two different tracks. It's that well separated, and I do want to make sure that that gets mentioned. I played Numb, Encore by Linkin Park and Jay-Z. Very, very black background, vocals just popping out, instruments against a pitch black background. Honestly, guys, this is a new milestone in closed backs. I played Tear You Up by Pineapple Thief. Very romantic vocals. I mean, the song gets noisier and a bit busy during complex passages, and the drum hits hard. There's a bass guitar that sounds very authoritative. Cymbal splashes are just well controlled. And Bruce Seward, which is the vocalist, is a magician, and he sounds just phenomenal on this. I mean, ZMF headphones will always do vocals well. If someone is telling you that this is not at the same level of vocal performance as a VC, that person just likes thicker vocals. This is not thin vocals by any means, guys. I didn't grow up listening to Hyphemans, but I love Hypheman headphones, but they can be thin, but still amazing. This is not thin by any stretch of the imagination. This is a ton of note weight. This is a nice, thick sounding headphone. Not as thick as a VC. So that's worth keeping in mind. So I've mentioned note weight, and I've also said that this is like the bass is so awesome and the mid range is so awesome. It's like the TC, the BIS AB12665 TC. It's as if the TC and the Atrium had a baby. It's almost like a love child between the TC and the Atrium. So a lot of things I didn't like about the TC, a lot of things I love about the Atrium, and this is like a love child born out of wedlock from those two headphones, because it has a mid range of an Atrium, it has the note weight of an Atrium, it has the sub bass of a TC. It has a staging, I think, of an Atrium and a TC. That's the ADS, the Atrium damping system in play. And very lovely, nice vocals, which I think is like treble as well, which is slightly more reminiscent of not the Atrium Open, which I think has a warmer treble, but this does have a livelier treble. And I did play it off my Sony W1 ZM2 as well. Tremendous note weight. I played a Porcupine Tree track called Blackest Eyes. And the weight of not just the drums, but of the acoustic guitar was phenomenal on this, guys. So all in all, guys, it is closer to Harman than a lot of other ZMF headphones. It is not exactly Harman tune. It is an improvement on Harman in the fact that it's not as perhaps upper mids forward as Harman can be. It does have more treble, which I like more than Harman, because Harman just lobs of the treble and just sounds like very shouty to me. It's more balanced in that there's more sub bass, there's more upper mids, there's more treble energy. So it's W shaped. I do tend to gravitate towards W shaped tunings. And last but not least, I will quickly talk about how this works with different sources. And guys, like I said, this is a first impressions video, and I will talk more about this headphone in future videos. Especially, I'll do at least one more long-term review where I talk about this headphone in relation to the Focal Stellia, which I have not talked about in this video. So guys, quickly, just to talk about how different sources drive this, right? So a lot of you are, I feel like, there are audiophiles who resist the notion that headphones scale with power, and then there are audiophiles who have this notion that you only can drive headphones off a speaker amp, and that the sort of power you need. And there are, of course, most of us who are in the middle. So this is not the most powerful portable device with which to drive headphones, but this has about 120 clicks of volume. I can get this loud and slamming and looking and sounding very, very fine of around 80 clicks, 80 to 88 clicks. So I do have to sort of crank the volume up. And this has a very lush and thick sound signature, which I think does work really well with this. It brings out the vocal sweetness, the vocal melody. It does bring out the sort of analog nature of these headphones, and I do like it a lot with the Sony W1 ZM2, albeit it might underpower it. So no treble fatigue, no nothing, but I do lack a slight bit of resolution when I'm driving with the Sony W1 ZM2. So what do? I then move on to the Hugo 2, which is slightly more powerful, or substantially more powerful than the Sony W1 ZM2. The Hugo 2 has that tremendous staying power. It's one of those headphones. So this is my Moon Audio cable, the micro USB, which then I use to connect to either my phone or my DAP or my tabs even. So the Hugo 2 is well known for being bright. Not bright, it's more neutral, analytical, leaning towards bright. The Hugo 2 does have a bit of a forward lower treble, a forward upper mids. It's very fast, very snappy, and highly resolving. So the first change I noticed when I moved from the Sony W1 ZM2 to the Hugo 2 with the Atrium Closed is that it becomes quicker and transient, snappier, a lot more resolving, more deep and layered in terms of its staging. And in fact, the staging starts wowing me on the Hugo 2 because this has some of the best stage depth and layering that I've heard. And the Atrium Closed is just phenomenal on this in terms of, it has this cavernous and deep stage, which is amazing on this, guys. Bass is quicker. I do sense I lose a little bit of bass impact going from the Sony W1 ZM2 to this. But I honestly highly recommend Core devices with the Atrium. If you can handle a bit of treble sparkle, it's never been fatiguing for me, guys. I can handle treble, but that's perhaps me. But I really liked this pairing. It was phenomenal. I did try it with an OTL very briefly, the Felix Audio Euphoria Anniversary Edition, not the Evo, which is an OTL, and it does have the effect of smoothing the entire sound profile, not to the level it becomes overly smooth, but it does become a little warmer and more analog and just bigger. So big and size of the sound is something that's very hard to quantify or talk about, but this has a big sound. This has a massive sound. It's very speaker-like in only in that sense. That's worth keeping in mind, and that comes from the fact that there's bass energy, mid-range, and treble. So it is like being very up and close to the music, very, very visceral. Last but not the least, this is even more powerful than the Hugo 2, the Diablo. So the change I perceive in moving to the Diablo, and despite having more power than the Hugo 2, is I lose a bit of resolution. Resolution is, I get the most resolution with the Hugo 2, followed by the Diablo, although the Diablo is more powerful. So this goes to show that just by scaling on power, you don't always scale on technical performance. However, I do get a blacker background on the Diablo, so that's worth keeping in mind. So images are then popping out of left, right, and center, and it's just very visceral once you hear this from the Diablo. So that's it, guys. Quick impressions video. This is a phenomenal headphone, and I might prefer it to the Verite Closed even. Why? Because the Verite Closed is very romantic. It's quicker in a certain sense. That has the beryllium driver, but this is more impactful. The bass decay is just to die for, guys. It's a very analog bass. The Verite Closed doesn't have as much sub bass as this. There's a slight bit of sub bass roll off, but you won't feel it because it's such a balanced headphone. The Verite Closed is so sweet and romantic and amazing. And I don't want to knock the Verite Closed because if I had it with me right now, I would keep both of them. But honestly, this deserves to stand on its own in the ZMF lineup pantheon of headphones. So I hope this was useful, guys. Stay tuned for my full video, which I'll be dropping soon. A big shout out to Zach and Bevan for the wonderful service. I was missing pads on this one, and they shipped it to me all the way from the US. Shout out for their amazing customer service, guys. If you haven't tried a ZMF headphone, you have no idea what you're missing out. If you're reluctant to step into the world of closed back headphones because you think they don't image well or sound like open backs or are not as resolving as open backs or can sound muddy, etc., this will defy all your sort of preconceived notions of what a closed back can sound like. Give the Atrium Closed a shot, and I think you'll not be disappointed. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for my next one. Bye-bye.